would like to talk to you today about a very important item here at ODOT, and that is pre- and post-trip inspection. Pre- and post-trip inspection is important for so many reasons, but some of the most important ones concern your safety and the safety of the motoring public. We also know that a well-maintained fleet is a cost-effective fleet. However, the most important reason for me personally for you to perform the pre- and post-trip inspections is so that you can be safe throughout your shift and go home at the end of the day.
I'd like to talk to you today about using ODOT's newest pre-trip form doing our maintenance pre-trip inspection of a 10-yard dump truck. This pre-trip is a legal requirement as well as ODOT policy. As an agency, we've came up with this new form, the pre-trip and post-trip form. We don't expect everybody to remember everything on it. So as you're doing your pre-trip and your post-trip, you just follow it one by one, and as you're doing it, you check each one off. So if you have any questions about doing this form, you flip over to the second page, and it totally gives you all the information that you need to properly fill out the form. You will need your clipboard and a pen to complete it. I cannot emphasize enough how important this is for you guys to do on a daily basis. So as we start our pre-trip, we're looking for any visible oil leaks on the ground and anything dripping off the frame of the truck, the motor. We're looking for coolant, we're looking for diesel fuel leaks, hydraulic oil, and engine oil leaks. So if you find a visible oil leak, fuel, or coolant leak on the ground, you're going to want to notify your mechanic immediately and your coordinator, because you're not going to be able to go do the daily tasks because you have a major leak with the truck. So unless you get this problem fixed, the truck will not be able to leave the yard. So as I'm doing the leaks test, I'm checking right here in the front of the truck by the motor, working my way back, checking for more oil leaks out of the transmission, hydraulic tank, coming back here to the diesel tank, looking under here to see if there's any fluid leaks, coming back here, even back to the back rear ends, which have oil in them as well. We're checking for any leaks back here. After checking underneath the 10-yarder, next we're going to go into the engine compartment. To do this, we have to pop the hood. On these newer Volvos, we open the door, we reach in here, and this lever will release the hood. So as we're walking up to the truck into the engine compartment, we're checking the engine oil, checking the power steering fluid, and we're checking the coolant level as well. Check the engine oil, we'll pull the dipstick out, we'll wipe it off. Putting it back in, pulling it back out, making sure that the level is between add and full. That is at the proper operating level. After checking the engine oil, making sure it's at the proper operating level, we will begin by checking the power steering fluid. We go over here to the reservoir, loosen the cap, pulling it out, wiping it down, sticking it back in, pull it back out. Fluid line is right about there. Just a little under full, but well above add. That's where we want to see it. As you return the dipstick back to the reservoir, make sure when you put it back in, you properly tighten it down so it does not come loose. After checking the engine oil level and the power steering level, next we're going to check the coolant reservoir. We're making sure that the fluid is above the minimum mark here on the reservoir. If you were to see that the coolant was low, you would want to make sure you put in the right type of coolant to bring it up above this minimum mark. Once you've checked your fluids, engine oil, power steering, and your coolant, next we move to the belts and hoses. We're starting here at the charge air hose, and we're going to also check our radiator hoses as well, which here and in here to make sure that they're not cracked or frayed, anything leaking. As you're checking your belts and hoses, it doesn't matter which side, you just want to make sure you're very thorough with it. Checking each one for leaks in your hoses, coming down into the belts, making sure that they're not cracked or frayed, making sure there's no more than 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch of deflection on it. We're checking back here at the main belt, making sure it is not cracked or frayed and that there's a proper tension on it as well. While you're over here, check your air cleaner by giving it a wiggle to make sure it's securely fastened to the firewall of the truck. Also, check to make sure that the parameters of your gauge, restriction gauge, are within the operating range. The next thing you need to do is check your exhaust starting at the turbo. You're checking your clamps, doing a visual walkthrough as you're going along, making sure your clamps are good, coming back under to here. Clamps are good here, no visible soot trail showing that you would have an exhaust leak. Coming back around to here, making sure your clamps are good and tight here, no soot trails down here as well. And also making sure that everything with your exhaust system is securely fastened. On this truck, the air compressor is buried way in the back. We're checking it for leaks and making sure it's securely mounted. These components on these trucks will be located in different areas depending on the year, make, and model of your truck. If you haven't already, you'll find that gloves can be an essential tool, proper PPE, for your truck inspection. Starting at the steering linkage, we're at the input shaft. We're wiggling the input shaft to make sure the U-joint is not loose, making sure that it is not cracked or bent. Then we drop down to the steering gearbox. We're making sure that there's no fluid leaks out of the seal on top, checking the hoses to make sure they're not cracked or frayed. There's no leaks here. Checking the bolts to make sure they're good and tight. Next, we're dropping down to the pitman arm, making sure it is not cracked or bent. Making sure the castle nut and cotter pin are in place. Then we work our way back to the drag link, making sure that it is not cracked or bent, making sure that the castle nut and cotter pin are in place. Then we work our way back to the tie rod, making sure it is not cracked or bent, and making sure that the castle nut and cotter pin are in place as well. The steering inspection is complete. Now we're going to check the front springs, the mounts, U-bolts, and the front axle. We're looking right here at the front mount, making sure it's not cracked or bent, that the bolts are all tight, the bushing is intact. Working our way down the springs, we're making sure that there are none missing, none misaligned, and there's no cracks or breaks in the springs. Coming down to the U-bolts, grabbing a hold of them, making sure that they're not cracked or bent and that they are securely snug. Checking the front axle, making sure that it is not cracked or bent. Working our way back through the back of the spring to the back mount, making sure that the bushings are in place, making sure that the mounts are not cracked or bent, and making sure that all the bolts are nice and tight. After our front axle inspection is complete, now we're going to do the safe start. We're going to leave the hood open. That will indicate that an inspection is still going on with the vehicle. Now we're going to get in the cab and do the safe start of the vehicle. This vehicle has an I-shift transmission. It's more like the automatic. If this was a manual transmission, to do the safe start, you would push in the clutch, make sure the vehicle is in neutral, and then safe start it. With this rig, with the I-shift automatic in it, we're going to hold our foot down on the brake and start the vehicle. So now we're making sure our foot's on the brake, truck is in neutral, starting the truck. We're making sure that the oil pressure has came up to the proper operating PSI. Checking both air pressure gauges to make sure the air pressure is building to the proper PSI. And going into the gauge mode, scrolling down until we get to the battery icon, which is a voltmeter, and the voltmeter should be operating between 13 and 14 volts on the Volvo. Now that we've got the vehicle running, we're going to check all of our lights, four-way flashers, brake lights, marker lights, reflectors, headlights, roto beam. If you have a crew member available, that's the easiest way to check your brake lights. Step on the brake pedal, lights will come on, he'll give you the thumbs up. If nobody's available to help you check your brake lights, just step on the brake pedal and look at the back wall of the shop, and you can usually see the lights illuminate on the back wall. With the truck running, we're going to walk around and do the rest of our inspection. As we walk around the truck, we're going to be checking our lights, we're going to be checking our frame, tires, lug nuts, etc. as we do our walk around. So we're starting here, making sure our steps, they're secure. Looking back here, checking the frame, checking the toolbox, making sure the door is shut, making sure there's no cracks or bends in the frame. Checking underneath here with the truck running, making sure there's no leaks, making sure our fuel tank, the cap is securely fastened, making sure that the tank is secure and fastened, no broken, missing bolts and nuts. Walking along the frame here, checking it. At the tire, we're making sure that we're at the proper tread depth of our tires. 230 seconds for the rear, 430 seconds for the front. You can check your tread depth with a penny. When you stick the penny in, you do not want to be able to see the top of Lincoln's head. If you see the top of Lincoln's head, then you're at the bare minimum tread depth that's legal. Making sure the wheels are not cracked or bent. Making sure that the lug nuts are all secure and tight. Making sure the hub seal's not leaking. Working our way back to the suspension, making sure that the bushing's in place, there's no loose nuts or bolts, making sure that the springs are in place, making sure they're not misaligned, cracked, or broken, making sure the torque arm is not cracked or bent, making sure all the bolts are nice and tight on that, checking the next tire, making sure it's not proper tread depth, making sure there's no cuts in the sidewalls, so making sure there's nothing in between the duals. So as you're checking to make sure your lug nuts are tight, we're also looking for rust trails. It's little tiny lines that come out from the corners of the lug nuts showing that they would be loose and need to be retightened again. There are no rust trails on this truck. This is a bolster strap. Not all trucks are equipped with them, but if yours is, you're looking back into the little hole in the suspension, and you're going to reach in here, push on it, reach in and give it a little tug to make sure it is securely fastened. If it's not working, it'll be fairly obvious because the strap will be broken to or not connected on one end or the other. If it's not securely fastened, then do not take the truck out of the yard and get a hold of your mechanic immediately. So now we're checking the mud flaps. We're making sure they're not ripped or torn. They're securely fastened and they're no more than 10 inches off the ground. Come around, we're checking our tail lights, we're checking our turn signals, both sides, making sure the marker lights are on. Coming back to this side, same as the other side, checking the mud flap, making sure it's not ripped or torn and securely mounted, no more than 10 inches off the ground. Checking the tires, tread depth once again, making sure there's no debris in between the duals. Checking the lug nuts, making sure they're tight and secure, no rust trails. Making sure there's no leaks out of the seal. Coming along, checking our frame, making sure that there's no loose bolts, making sure that the frame is not cracked or bent. Checking the rear suspension, looking into the spring mounts, looking at the springs, making sure there's none missing, misaligned, cracked, or broken, making sure that the bolts are nice and tight, making sure that the torque arms are not cracked or bent, make sure the bolts are nice and tight on those, checking this tire. If it's not properly inflated, it will sound soft or hollow. No cuts in the sidewalls. Tread depth, making sure the lug nuts are nice and tight. No rust trails. Hub seal's good, not leaking. Continuing on down the truck, we're checking the frame, making sure it's not cracked or bent. Bolts are nice and tight. Making sure the step is nice and tight on this. Checking the front tire. Making sure that the bolts are nice and tight. No rust trails on the lug nuts. Make sure the tread depth, no cuts in the sidewalls. Coming around to the front here, we're going to check this front tire as well, making sure it's proper tread depth. The sidewalls, there's no cuts or frays or bulges. Making sure the lug nuts are nice and tight. There's no rust trails, indicating that the lug nuts would be loose. So we're going to close the hood now, and as we close the hood, we're going to look down and check our bumper bolts to make sure they're securely fastened. The hood is now securely fastened. We've got the bumper bolts here on both sides, just making sure that they are tight, nothing broke, no rust trails. Now that we're done with our exterior checks of the truck, we're going to get inside, finish up the interior side of it, and do the air brakes check as well. So when you're inside of your truck, the things you want to be looking for, making sure you have a fire extinguisher, you've got your safety triangles behind the seat, and you've got your spare fuses, which are kept in the ashtray of this truck. Next, we're checking our mirrors to make sure that none of them are cracked or broken. Make sure they're clean. Our front window, making sure it's not cracked or broke. Make sure it's clean. Checking the windshield wipers to make sure they go. We're going to check our heater defroster, making sure that it's blowing air. Gonna check the horn, starting with the electric. And then the air horn. Checking to make sure the backup alarm is working. This is pretty obvious, but we want to make sure that we keep the interiors of our trucks nice and clean. Remove all trash and garbage at the end of your shift. You also need to make sure you have a working, secure seat belt. Now that we're done with the interior checks, we're going to do the air brake check. We're going to start off with the leaks test. We're going to fan the brakes down to 90 psi. Hold the brake for 1 minute. The air pressure should stay the same or increase. Hold the brake for 1 minute. The air pressure should stay the same or increase. You can see the air pressure has increased. Next, we're going to do the low air warning device check. That's the audio and visual part of it. We will fan the brakes down. The low air audio and visual should come on at 60 psi, but no less than 55 psi, or it is an equipment failure. You can see the audio and visual came on at about 55 psi, 56, so everything is still working properly. So next we're going to do the parking brake check. To do this, we're going to put our foot on the brake, with the parking brake applied, going to put the truck in drive, let off the brake, give a little throttle. You can feel it tug, but the truck will not go anywhere, ensuring you that the parking brake is set and holding the truck properly. So I know this seems like a lot, but once you get used to the form, it should only take you about 10 minutes to complete this pre-trip. Hello and welcome again. We're going to do a maintenance pre-trip on our trailer. It is equally as important to do as a maintenance pre-trip on our truck. We've got our new form out, our maintenance pre-trip form, and we've got a checklist for the trailer just like we did for the truck. With your trailer hooked up to the truck, you need to have your wheel chocks in place to do the inspection properly. The place I like to start is right in here at the pintle hitch and the pintle eye. Starting with the pintle hook, we're making sure that it is not cracked or bent. We're checking to make sure we've got grade 8 bolts and that they are securely tightened. We're moving to the pintle eye, making sure it has grade 8 bolts as well that are securely fastened, making sure that the pintle eye is not cracked or bent. We're coming down to our safety chains, making sure there's no broken or weak links. Checking the hook to make sure it is not cracked or bent. We're checking the D-rings where the hooks hook into to make sure they're not cracked or bent. And the welds, there's no cracks in the welds. Checking our air lines and electrical lines. We're checking to make sure that the air lines there's no cuts or frays or bulges, that they're securely fastened with no leaks. Checking to the electrical wires to make sure there's no cuts or frays or bare wires exposed. After checking the pintle hook, the air lines, and your safety chains, we move over to the landing gear. We're checking the landing gear to make sure the handle is in the upright position. We're checking to make sure the bolts are securely fastened, making sure that the landing gear is in the upright position, making sure there are no broken welds. Next, we're going to go to the door of the trailer for the chain box. The door is shut when you're going down the highway. You're making sure that the welds, there's no cracks in the welds. You're also making sure that you have the proper chains and binders to tie down the load that you're going to haul. Next, we're walking around over here to check the D-rings on the side of the trailer to tie your load down to. You're checking to make sure each one all the way down the trailer is not cracked or bent. Make sure that the welds have no cracks in them and that they're securely fastened to the side of the trailer. Next, we're going to check down the side of the trailer. We're checking the outer frame rail, making sure it's not cracked or bent. We're checking the inner frame rail to make sure it is not cracked or bent from the beginning to clear to the end of the trailer. We're also checking our cross members to make sure they're not cracked or bent. We're walking back to the tires and wheels. We're checking the tires to make sure there's no cuts in the sidewalls, there's no debris in between the duals. We're checking to make sure that it's proper tread depth, no less than 2/32 on the rear of the truck and trailer. We're checking our wheel to make sure it is not cracked or bent. We're checking the lug nuts to make sure they're all tight, that there is no rust trails, indicating that it would be loose. We're also checking the hub seal to make sure it's not leaking. We're also checking to make sure that the oil level is at the proper operating level. If it's not, then you need to get with your mechanic and get some oil and get it up to the proper operating level before you leave the shop. You might find it difficult to check the hub oil level, but if you take a flashlight and you hold it up above it, you can actually see where the oil is at the proper operating level. Make sure you check each hub with a flashlight as you go along doing your maintenance pre-trip. Now we're going to talk about the trailer suspension. We're talking about the suspension mounts, the springs, the U-bolts, and the torque arm. We're looking at the front mount, making sure that the welds aren't cracked, that the mount is not cracked or broken. Checking the springs, making sure that all the springs are there, there's none missing, none misaligned. Making sure that the U-bolts are not cracked or bent. Making sure they're tight. Coming down to the torque arm, making sure it's not cracked or bent. There's no loose bolts. Then working our way back around to the middle of the suspension is the main bushing and the center mount, making sure that it is not cracked or bent as well. Bushing is in place and all the bolts are tight. We do this for all the wheels, for all of the suspension of the trailer, both sides. Okay, next we're going to check the brakes. This is one of the most important but most overlooked. We're checking to make sure that the slack adjusters and push rods are at their proper adjustment. We're checking to make sure that it is less than 90 degrees when the brakes are applied, your slack adjuster and push rod. When the brakes are released with the wheels chocked, should not be more than 1 inch of play when you have the brakes released. These brakes are applied and they are correct. They are less than 90 degrees. You need to check all the wheels. Unfortunately, the only way to check these brakes is to get under and look at each one individually. Next, we're going to talk about the trailer deck. This trailer has a metal decking with holes in it to let some of the debris fall through. You're checking to make sure that it's not cracked or bent, that all the welds are in place, and that your deck is free of debris and anything that could fly off going down the highway and break another vehicle's windshield as you're going down the road. Also, this is on a newer trailer. A lot of our older trailers at ODOT have the wood deck. What we're looking for in the wood deck trailers is we're making sure that there's no broken boards, that it's going to help support your load and that you won't fall through the wood decking. Make sure it's securely bolted down and all the bolts are tight. Just like with the truck inspection, we need to make sure that the trailer inspection is the same. We're checking all of our lights, making sure turn signals and brake lights and marker lights all are working properly. We'll get into the truck. If you've got somebody working with you, you could step on the brake pedal and have them check to make sure your lights come on. If you're by yourself, you can step on the brakes and you can watch on the back door of your shop usually, and you can see the brake lights illuminate the back wall. So we're just walking around checking to make sure our lights and reflectors are on. Amber in the front, red in the rear, making sure each and every one of them is working. You can see our side marker turn signal's working. Our red in the rear turn signal or marker light is working. We've got our 4 ways flashing, marker lights on the back, and down this side of the trailer as well. All the lights are working. Now we're going to do the air brakes check for the truck and trailer combination together. We're going to do this by pushing in both the yellow and the red knobs. We will then fan our brakes down and you'll watch the gauge go down. As the gauge drops down, the valve should pop back out and set the brakes at 30 psi and no less than 20 or it is an equipment failure. So I'm going to release my brakes. The wheel chocks are in place still. Gonna fan my brakes down now. And both valves popped out, showing that the tractor protection valve is working properly. It popped out about 25 psi. So with your brakes applied, don't forget to get out and get your wheel chocks. Now that your pre-trip is completed, if you find anything that needs immediate repair, go ahead and get a hold of your mechanic on duty and have him fix it before you go out. Throughout the day, if you find anything else wrong with the truck, go ahead and mark it in the post-trip box and turn that into your mechanic at the end of the day.